When I turned 65, I spent 3 weeks planning a family dinner. I cooked my son's favorite pot roast, set the table with my best china, and waited by the window for headlights that never came. At 9 p.m., I opened Facebook and saw my daughter-in-law smiling on a luxury cruise ship with my entire family behind her. The caption said, "Finally enjoying real family time." I just sat there staring at the screen until my granddaughter accidentally posted a video from the ship whispering, "Mom says Grandma would ruin the trip." They thought humiliating me was the end of the story. They had no idea what I found inside my late husband's safe the next morning. The night I turned 65, I sat alone at a dining table set for 8 while my entire family toasted champagne on a cruise ship without me. I didn't cry. I just kept staring at the candles until the wax melted down into little pools beside the birthday cake no one came to eat. I'm Loretta Hayes, and until that night, I truly believed I still mattered to my family. 3 weeks earlier, I had started planning the dinner. Not because anyone asked me to. They rarely asked me for anything anymore unless it involved babysitting, money, or recipes they wanted to pretend were theirs. But I kept telling myself families go through phases. Children grow up. Lives become busy. My son Ethan worked long hours at an accounting firm in downtown Chicago, and Vanessa, my daughter-in-law, always seemed exhausted from managing schedules, dance lessons, soccer practice, and posting photos online that made their life look perfect. I tried not to take the distance personally. Still, turning 65 felt important to me. My late husband Walter used to make birthdays feel sacred. Every year, he'd wake me before sunrise with coffee and say, "One more year the world got to keep you." Even after 37 years of marriage, he never forgot to make me feel seen. Walter had been gone for almost 4 years now. Some mornings I still reached across the bed expecting to find his warmth there. Instead, all I touched was cold fabric and silence. So maybe this dinner wasn't really about a birthday. Maybe I just wanted to feel like I still had a place in the family we built together. I spent days preparing. I polished the good china Walter's mother passed down to me. I ironed the linen napkins by hand because Vanessa once said paper napkins looked cheap. I drove 40 minutes to a bakery in Evanston to order Ethan's favorite chocolate cream cake, even though standing that long made my knees ache afterward. The morning of my birthday, I woke up before 6 and started cooking. Pot roast, garlic mashed potatoes, honey glazed carrots, homemade rolls. Everything Ethan loved growing up. The kitchen smelled warm and familiar by noon, and for the first time in weeks, the house didn't feel so empty. I even bought fresh flowers for the dining room table. White lilies. Walter always loved lilies. Around 4 in the afternoon, I changed into a navy blue dress I hadn't worn since Easter. I curled my silver hair carefully and put on lipstick even though my hands trembled slightly these days. When I looked in the mirror, I saw an older woman, yes, but not invisible. Not yet. Ethan texted me around 5. Running a little behind. Traffic. I smiled when I read it. Typical Chicago traffic. I texted back, "Drive safe, honey." Vanessa didn't text at all. That wasn't unusual anymore. By 6 o'clock, the food was ready. Candles lit. Plates arranged. I turned on soft jazz in the living room just to make the house feel less quiet while I waited. At 6:30, I checked my phone again. Nothing. By 7, the mashed potatoes had started drying out around the edges. I called Ethan. Straight to voicemail. "Hey, sweetheart," I said after the beep, forcing cheerfulness into my voice. "Just checking in. Dinner's ready whenever you get here." I hung up quickly, suddenly embarrassed by how eager I sounded. 7:30 came and went. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. I reheated the gravy twice. Every pair of headlights passing my house made my heart lift for a moment before fading again. By 8:15, I stopped pretending to eat and just sat there at the head of the table staring at the empty chairs. 8 chairs. 1 for me. 1 for Ethan. 1 for Vanessa. 2 for the grandkids. My sister Diane and her husband Mark. And my niece Kelly, who promised she'd stop by after work. None of them came. Not one. I told myself there had to be an explanation. A flat tire. A sick child. An accident on the interstate. Anything. My chest felt tight, but I kept waiting. Around 9, I finally picked up my phone again. No missed calls. No apologies. Nothing except a Facebook notification. Normally, I ignored social media. Vanessa practically lived on it, posting endless photos of vacations, brunches, matching Christmas pajamas, and captions about gratitude and family blessings. But something made me open the app that night. Maybe instinct. Maybe loneliness. Maybe God finally deciding I deserved to see the truth. The first thing I saw was Vanessa's smiling face under bright Caribbean sunlight. She wore oversized sunglasses and held a champagne flute in one manicured hand while Ethan stood beside her with his arm around the children. Behind them stretched an enormous white cruise ship floating on impossibly blue water. My stomach dropped so suddenly I thought I might faint. The caption read, "Finally enjoying real family time. Much needed escape from toxic energy." Underneath it were dozens of comments. "Beautiful family. You deserve this. Living your best life." I kept staring at the photo, unable to breathe properly. Everyone was there. Ethan, Vanessa, the kids, Diane, Mark, Kelly. My entire family smiling together on a luxury cruise while I sat alone beside a cold pot roast and an untouched birthday cake. The timestamp showed the photo had been posted nearly an hour earlier, which meant while I was reheating gravy and checking the driveway, they were probably drinking cocktails under string lights somewhere in the Caribbean. My hands started shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. I clicked through more photos. My grandson Tyler grinning beside a swimming pool. My granddaughter Emma holding an ice cream cone bigger than her hand. Ethan smiling wider than I'd seen him smile in months. Then I saw one photo that hurt more than all the others combined. It was a group picture at dinner aboard the ship. Everyone seated around a giant table laughing together beneath golden lights. In the center sat Vanessa raising her glass toward the camera like a queen celebrating victory. There was an empty chair beside Ethan. My chair. I don't know how long I sat there staring at those photos. 10 minutes. Maybe an hour. The candles burned lower and lower until one finally flickered out completely. The room smelled like cold gravy and melting wax. My phone buzzed suddenly in my hand. A new notification. Vanessa had posted a short video clip from the cruise. I pressed play before I could stop myself. Music played loudly in the background while the adults laughed around the table. Then the camera shifted briefly toward my granddaughter Emma. "Say hi to Grandma," someone shouted jokingly off-screen. Emma giggled and leaned toward the camera. Then in a tiny whisper she said, "Mommy says Grandma would ruin the trip." The video ended right there. I felt something inside me go completely still. Not broken. Not shattered. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes right before a storm rolls in across the lake. I slowly set my phone face down on the table and looked around the dining room Walter, and I spent decades filling with birthdays, Christmas mornings, and Sunday dinners. The lilies were beginning to droop already. The roast sat untouched beneath the kitchen light. 8 plates. 8 cloth napkins. 8 empty seats. And for the first time in my life, I realized loneliness doesn't come from being alone. It comes from discovering the people you love have already left you emotionally long before they leave you physically. At exactly 9:43 that night, I stood up from the table, blew out the final candle, and walked upstairs to the bedroom Walter and I once shared. I opened the closet, reached for the small brass key taped beneath the top shelf, and remembered the last thing my husband ever said to me about the old safe hidden in the garage wall. "If they ever make you feel small, Loretta," he'd whispered during his final week alive, "promise me you'll finally see people for who they are." I stood in the garage for a long time before I finally reached for the flashlight hanging beside the door. The house was completely silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator somewhere behind me and the rain tapping softly against the roof. My heels clicked against the concrete floor as I walked toward the old wooden workbench Walter built nearly 20 years ago. Most people would have missed the safe entirely. Walter had hidden it behind a panel covered with shelves full of paint cans and rusty tools he never threw away. He used to joke that no thief would ever survive digging through his garage long enough to find anything valuable. My hands trembled slightly as I slid the loose panel aside. The small steel safe sat exactly where I remembered. Cold, dusty, quiet. For a moment I just stared at it while memories rushed over me so hard I could barely breathe. Walter kneeling beside this same wall teaching Ethan how to use a socket wrench when he was 12 years old. Walter wiping grease from his hands before pulling me close and dancing with me in the garage during a thunderstorm because the radio happened to be playing our song. Walter sitting in his recliner during his final week alive, his skin pale and tired, whispering that strange warning about people making me feel small. At the time, I thought he was talking about grief. About loneliness after losing him. I did not realize he already saw something happening inside our family long before I did. I crouched carefully beside the safe and slid the brass key into the lock. It stuck at first from years of disuse. I turned harder until I heard the mechanism click open with a dull metallic sound that echoed through the garage. Inside were folders, envelopes, a small velvet jewelry box, and one thick sealed letter with my name written across the front in Walter's handwriting. Loretta. My chest tightened the moment I saw it. I carried the letter back inside and sat at the kitchen table beneath the dim stove light. The birthday cake was still sitting there untouched beneath the plastic bakery cover. I could still smell chocolate frosting mixed with cold coffee and candle smoke. For a second, I almost laughed at how ridiculous the night had become. 65 years old and sitting alone at midnight reading secret letters from my dead husband while my family sailed somewhere near the Bahamas pretending I did not exist. I opened the envelope carefully. My dearest Loretta, if you are reading this, then something has happened that finally opened your eyes. I stopped breathing for a moment. Even now Walter sounded like he was sitting across from me speaking gently over his coffee mug. I kept reading. I know you better than anyone. You always choose forgiveness first. You always assume people mean well. It is one of the reasons I loved you from the moment I met you outside that grocery store in Milwaukee 40 years ago. But kindness becomes dangerous when people start confusing it for weakness. I swallowed hard. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance. I continued reading slowly, hearing his voice inside my head with every word. Ethan is a good man, but he is easily led by stronger personalities. He always has been. I saw it when he was a boy following troublemakers at school because he wanted to belong. And I see it now with Vanessa. I never wanted to interfere in his marriage, but there are things you deserve to know if I am not here to protect you anymore. My stomach turned cold. Walter went on to explain how he quietly separated several assets before his health declined. The lake cabin in Wisconsin. The investment account. The retirement bonds. Everything had been placed into a private trust under my name only. Not Ethan's. Not joint family ownership. Mine. My fingers tightened around the pages. Walter knew. Somehow he knew this day might come. Beneath the letter sat another envelope containing copies of bank statements and trust documents. I recognized one account immediately because Ethan had helped me manage it after Walter passed away. My eyes narrowed as I looked closer at the withdrawals. Thousands of dollars missing over the past 2 years. Small amounts at first. $800. $1,200. Then larger. $5,000. $10,000. Most labeled vaguely as family expenses or temporary transfers. I stared at the numbers until they blurred together. Ethan always told me he was moving money around for tax purposes. Vanessa worked in marketing and constantly talked about investments and maximizing accounts and smart financial planning. I trusted them. God help me, I trusted them completely. Suddenly another memory surfaced so clearly it made me flinch. Last Thanksgiving, Vanessa casually suggesting I should sell the house because it must be exhausting maintaining all this space alone. The way Ethan avoided eye contact during that conversation. The way Vanessa kept mentioning luxury retirement communities in Florida with heated pools and organized activities as if she were reading from a brochure. At the time, I thought she was trying to help. Now I realized she was testing boundaries. Seeing how easily I could be moved aside. I looked around my kitchen slowly. This house held every version of my life. Ethan taking his first steps across these hardwood floors. Walter teaching Emma how to roll pie dough at the counter. Christmas mornings. Graduation dinners. Sunday breakfasts after church. And somewhere along the way, my family stopped seeing me as the woman who built all of it. I became an obstacle. An aging inconvenience standing in the way of the polished lifestyle Vanessa wanted to display online. My phone buzzed suddenly beside my elbow. I jumped slightly before looking down. A text from Diane. My sister. Cruise Wi-Fi finally working LOL. Sorry about tonight. Vanessa said you told everyone you were tired and wanted a quiet birthday this year. I stared at the message in disbelief. Not only had they excluded me, they lied about it. My chest tightened so painfully I pressed my palm against it. Vanessa did not accidentally leave me behind. She erased me on purpose. Carefully. Quietly. The same way someone slowly removes old furniture from a room until eventually nobody remembers it was ever there. I set the phone down without answering. Then I opened Facebook again before I could stop myself. More cruise photos had appeared. Ethan holding a tropical drink beside Vanessa under glowing string lights. Emma wrapped in a beach towel smiling at the camera. Hundreds of likes. Comments about beautiful family memories. Perfect life. Blessed vacation. Then I noticed something strange beneath one photo. Vanessa had accidentally tagged the location of the luxury suite they were staying in. I recognized the cruise line immediately because Walter and I once looked into taking the same trip for our 40th anniversary before his diagnosis changed everything. The package cost nearly $15,000 for a week. $15,000. My stomach twisted again as I glanced back at the bank statements spread across the table. Suddenly, every missing dollar had a destination. Around 2 a.m, I finally stood and carried the untouched birthday cake into the refrigerator. The candles had hardened into crooked white puddles across the dining table. I peeled off the linen napkins one by one and folded them carefully even though my hands felt numb. 8 settings. 8 polished wine glasses. 8 people who chose to celebrate together while convincing themselves I was better off alone. I should have cried then. I think another version of me would have. The younger Loretta. The woman who spent decades trying to keep peace in the family no matter how much it cost her emotionally. But something inside me had changed while sitting in that garage reading Walter's letter. Grief was still there. Of course it was. But underneath it sat something colder. Clearer. I finally understood what Walter meant about weakness. The next morning, I woke before sunrise after barely sleeping at all. The house looked gray and unfamiliar in the early morning light. I made coffee and stood at the kitchen sink watching rainwater drip from the trees outside. Then I picked up my phone and searched for the number of Walter's attorney, Harold Bennett. My finger hovered over the call button for several seconds before I finally pressed it. Harold answered on the third ring, sounding half asleep. Loretta, he said with surprise. Everything all right? I looked toward the dining room where the birthday flowers were already beginning to wilt. Then I glanced at the stack of financial documents spread across my kitchen table. No, I said quietly. But I think it finally will be. Harold Bennett's office smelled exactly the same as it did the day Walter and I signed our will 23 years ago. Old leather. Dusty books. Burnt coffee sitting too long on a warmer. Some places never really change, and maybe that is why I felt myself relaxing slightly the moment I stepped inside. Harold looked older than I remembered. Thinner too. His white hair had nearly disappeared completely, leaving only a soft ring around the sides of his head. But his eyes stayed sharp the way good lawyers' eyes always do. He stood the moment he saw me walk in and immediately frowned. Loretta, he said gently, coming around the desk. You look exhausted. I tried to smile politely. I suppose I am. He helped me into the chair across from his desk and quietly pushed a box of tissues closer without making a show of it. That simple gesture almost broke me more than anything else had. Kindness feels different once you realize how long you have been surviving without it. Harold waited patiently while I removed the folders and Walter's letter from my purse. He did not interrupt while I explained the missing money, the cruise, the Facebook photos, or the message from Diane. The longer I spoke, the tighter his expression became. When I finally finished, he leaned back slowly and folded his hands together. Walter was worried about this, he said quietly. Hearing someone else confirm it made my stomach tighten again. He never told me. Because he knew you would defend Ethan. Harold removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Loretta, your husband loved your son deeply. But he also understood people can become blind inside certain marriages. I stared down at the edge of Walter's letter between my fingers. Blind. That was exactly the word for it. Ethan had not always been this man. When he was little, he used to leave handwritten notes in my purse before school field trips because he worried I would miss him while he was gone for the day. At 16, he worked weekends bagging groceries just so he could buy Walter a fishing rod for Father's Day. Even after college, he called me every Sunday night without fail. Then Vanessa entered his life, and slowly everything changed so gradually I convinced myself it was normal. At first it was small things. Ethan missing Sunday dinners because Vanessa preferred brunch with her friends. Holidays shortened because her family had traditions too. Birthdays rescheduled. Visits canceled. I accepted every explanation because I wanted to be easy. Understanding. Modern. Nobody warns mothers how quietly they can disappear from their children's lives. Harold opened one of the folders and carefully studied the bank statements. These transfers were authorized electronically, he said. Did Ethan have direct access to your accounts? I nodded slowly. After Walter died, Vanessa said I should simplify things. Ethan offered to help manage online banking since I never liked computers much. Harold's joy tightened slightly. And you trusted him. The shame that washed over me then surprised me more than anger ever could have. Not because I trusted my son. A mother should trust her son. The shame came from realizing how many warning signs I ignored because facing the truth felt too painful. Harold continued flipping through paperwork until he stopped suddenly on one page. Loretta, he said carefully. Did you know your home equity line was recently adjusted? I blinked. What? He turned the document toward me. My breath caught immediately. 6 months earlier, a $75,000 line of credit had been opened against my house. My signature sat neatly at the bottom of the form. Except it was not my signature. It looked close enough to fool someone glancing quickly, but not close enough to fool me. The room suddenly felt cold. I never signed this. Harold's expression darkened. I was afraid of that. I stared at the paper while memories started rearranging themselves inside my mind like pieces of broken glass, finding their proper shape. Vanessa insisting I sign insurance updates during Thanksgiving because Ethan was in a hurry. Ethan bringing random paperwork during dinner saying, "Just routine stuff, Mom." The way Vanessa always stood nearby watching carefully while I signed. My hands started trembling again. Harold reached across the desk and closed the folder gently. Loretta, listen to me carefully. Right now, you do not confront them emotionally. You do not accuse anyone over the phone. You do not warn them. I looked up slowly. Why? Because if there has been financial manipulation, the worst thing you can do is give people time to prepare excuses. The word manipulation settled heavily inside my chest. Harold was too professional to say theft. Too careful to say betrayal. But both of us understood what he meant. He stood and walked toward the large office window overlooking the parking lot below. Rain streaked the glass in crooked silver lines. Walter updated several protections before he passed, he said quietly. He moved major assets where nobody could access them without your direct approval, including the Wisconsin cabin. I swallowed hard. Vanessa loved that cabin. She constantly talked about renovating it into a vacation rental someday. There is something else, Harold added. He returned to his desk and opened another file drawer. Walter asked me to hold this unless circumstances required it. He slid a thick envelope across the desk toward me. Inside were printed emails. Dozens of them. At first, I did not understand what I was reading. Then my stomach dropped. They were messages between Vanessa and a real estate consultant. Discussions about my property. Renovation estimates. Future resale projections. One sentence near the bottom made my vision blur completely. Once Ethan finally convinces her to move into assisted living, we can list both properties before spring market season. I stopped breathing for a moment. Assisted living. They were planning my future without me while smiling at me over holiday dinners. I pressed my hand against my mouth as another memory surfaced suddenly. Last Christmas, Vanessa walking through my kitchen saying, This house is probably too much work for someone your age now. Ethan standing silently beside her pretending not to hear it. Dear God. They had already decided where my life was supposed to go. Harold let me sit quietly for several minutes. The office clock ticked softly behind him. Outside, cars moved through wet streets under gray skies while my entire understanding of my family collapsed piece by piece. Finally, I asked the question I had been avoiding since the moment I walked in. Do you think Ethan knows? Harold hesitated too, long before answering. I think your son knows more than he wants to admit to himself. That hurt worse than everything else combined. Because deep down, I already knew it too. Ethan may not have started this. He may not have planned every manipulation the way Vanessa clearly did. But he participated. He signed papers. He stayed quiet. He watched me slowly become smaller inside my own family and decided his comfort mattered more than my dignity. I looked down at my wedding ring still resting on my finger after all these years. Walter used to joke I would probably wear it into the grave someday because I never took it off. For the first time since his funeral, I twisted the ring slowly around my finger while thinking about what he tried to protect me from all along. Not loneliness. Not grief. Predators wearing familiar faces. Harold cleared his throat softly. There are steps we can take immediately. I nodded without speaking. We freeze vulnerable accounts. We secure the trust assets. And Loretta, he paused carefully. You need to prepare yourself emotionally. Because people who believe they are entitled to your life rarely react well once boundaries appear. Entitled. That word echoed inside my head during the drive home. Rain blurred the highway while windshield wipers moved steadily back and forth. My phone lit up twice with cruise photos from Diane. Sunset dinners. Poolside cocktails. Happy smiling faces. I did not open them. Somewhere during the last 24 hours, something inside me had shifted permanently. I still loved my son. Nothing would ever erase the years I spent raising him or the little boy he once was. But love without respect becomes dangerous. Walter understood that before I did. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the rain had stopped completely. My house sat quiet beneath the pale afternoon sky, looking exactly the same as always. But as I stepped inside carrying those folders against my chest, I realized this was the first day in years I was no longer waiting for my family to choose me first. From now on, I would choose myself. The house felt different after that meeting with Harold. Not emptier exactly. Clearer. Like someone had finally wiped fog from a window I had been staring through for years. I moved slowly through each room that afternoon, noticing details I somehow missed before. Vanessa's influence was everywhere once I knew how to look for it. The expensive espresso machine she convinced Ethan to leave at my house because it did not match their kitchen aesthetic. The unopened yoga mat she bought me for Christmas after casually mentioning that seniors needed to stay mobile. The stack of glossy brochures from luxury retirement communities tucked beside my mail basket. I used to interpret those things as thoughtfulness. Now they felt like breadcrumbs leading toward a future they had already planned for me. I made tea and sat by the dining room window watching gray clouds drift over the neighborhood. Across the street, Mrs. Campbell was struggling to drag her trash bin back toward her garage. Her grandson ran over immediately to help her, laughing while she fussed at him for doing all the work himself. Something about that simple moment tightened my chest unexpectedly. Families were supposed to protect the people who raised them, not slowly reposition them like unwanted furniture. My phone buzzed again beside me. Another message from Diane. Vanessa booked us massages at the spa on board. You would love the ship. I stared at the text for several seconds before finally turning the phone face down without replying. Diane had always been self-absorbed, but not cruel, which somehow made this worse. She truly believed I chose to stay home alone on my birthday while everyone else sailed through the Caribbean drinking champagne. Vanessa had rewritten reality so smoothly that people accepted it without question. That realization unsettled me more than the missing money ever did. Manipulation works best when it sounds reasonable. Around 5 in the evening, my doorbell rang unexpectedly. I nearly ignored it because I was too emotionally exhausted for conversation. But when I opened the door, I found my neighbor Linda standing there holding a casserole dish wrapped in foil. I made too much lasagna again, she said with a sheepish smile. Linda was around my age, recently widowed herself, with kind eyes and permanently windblown hair from gardening. Thought maybe you could help me avoid eating leftovers all week. I invited her in, suddenly grateful for the company. The moment she stepped inside, her expression shifted slightly. "Loretta," she said carefully, "are you all right?" It startled me how quickly she noticed. Maybe because genuine concern does not require dramatic signs. Sometimes people who care simply pay attention. I forced a small smile. "Just tired." Linda set the casserole on the counter and looked toward the dining room where the wilted birthday flowers still sat on the table. "I saw all those cruise photos online," she said slowly. "I assumed you went too." There it was again. The illusion Vanessa created for everyone else. I felt my throat tighten unexpectedly. "No," I said quietly. "I did not." Linda's eyes widened with immediate confusion. "But Ethan posted that family picture yesterday." She paused awkwardly. "I thought maybe you were staying in another suite or something." The humiliation washed over me all over again, fresh and sharp. Not because I cared about cruises. Walter and I were never flashy people. We preferred fishing cabins and quiet lake towns over luxury vacations. No, what hurt was understanding how publicly invisible I had become. They did not even bother hiding my exclusion. Somewhere deep down, they assumed nobody would question it because lonely older women disappearing quietly from family events had become normal. Linda sat with me for nearly an hour while rain tapped gently against the windows again. We talked about ordinary things at first. Gardening, rising grocery prices, her granddaughter starting college in Minnesota. But eventually she reached across the table and touched my hand softly. "You know," she said carefully, "Walter used to worry about you after he passed." I looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" Linda hesitated. "A few months before he died, he came over while Ethan and Vanessa were visiting. You remember that barbecue?" I nodded slowly. "Walter looked upset afterward. He told Frank he was afraid you would spend your later years apologizing for existing." The words hit me so hard I stopped breathing for a moment. Apologizing for existing. God, that was exactly what I had been doing. Shrinking myself smaller to stay convenient. Pretending not to notice disrespect because confrontation felt uncomfortable. Thanking people for scraps of attention while excusing behavior that would have horrified me years earlier. Linda squeezed my hand gently before leaving. After she drove away, I stood alone in the kitchen for a long time staring at the rain-darkened street outside. Then I did something I had not done in years. I walked upstairs to the hallway closet and pulled down the old photo albums Walter always insisted on printing instead of storing digitally. Dust floated softly through the air as I carried them into the living room. I sat cross-legged on the rug flipping slowly through decades of family history. Ethan at 6 years old missing his front teeth and grinning proudly beside his first bicycle. Ethan at 10 asleep against Walter's shoulder during a camping trip in Door County. Ethan at 22 hugging me tightly after college graduation while promising he would always take care of me someday the way I took care of him. Tears finally blurred my vision then. Not loud, dramatic sobbing. Just quiet tears sliding down my face while I stared at the son I used to know. Somewhere around midnight, I reached the album from Ethan and Vanessa's wedding. I almost closed it immediately. But instead I forced myself to keep turning pages. Vanessa looked beautiful that day. Radiant. Elegant. The kind of woman who entered rooms already expecting admiration. I remembered how desperately I wanted her to feel welcomed in our family. Walter and I paid for nearly half the wedding because Vanessa's parents struggled financially at the time. I even spent 6 straight weekends helping hand-assemble centerpieces because Vanessa wanted a luxury wedding on a tight budget. And there, buried between smiling reception photos, I suddenly noticed something strange. In almost every picture, I stood slightly outside the center. Not fully excluded. Just positioned near the edges while Vanessa occupied the middle beside Ethan. Tiny details. Easy to dismiss individually. But once seen, impossible to ignore. I kept flipping. Christmas photos where Vanessa sat between Ethan and me. Birthday dinners where she subtly controlled seating arrangements. Vacation pictures where I somehow always ended up behind the camera instead of in front of it. It was like watching myself slowly fade from my own family over the course of years. No arguments. No dramatic fights. Just careful repositioning until I became background scenery. Around 1 in the morning, I closed the final album and sat quietly in the dark living room. Rain had stopped completely by then. The silence inside the house felt heavy but no longer hollow. For the first time in years, I was seeing my life clearly instead of emotionally. Vanessa did not remove me all at once. She trained everyone to overlook me gradually. And the most painful part was realizing how often I helped her do it by staying silent. My phone lit up suddenly beside me with an incoming video call from Ethan. Caribbean music echoed faintly through the speaker as his smiling face appeared on screen beneath colorful lights. Vanessa leaned into frame beside him wearing a white resort dress and oversized earrings. "Hey, Mom," Ethan said loudly over the music. "Sorry we missed your birthday dinner. Things got crazy before the trip." I stared at him quietly for a moment. Behind them, people laughed and danced near a glowing pool. Vanessa smiled brightly like nothing in the world was wrong. "We brought you something special from the islands," she added sweetly. I noticed she still had not apologized. "Not really." Ethan shifted awkwardly. "You are not upset, right?" The old version of me would have rushed to comfort him. Would have said, "Of course not, honey, enjoy your vacation." But that woman was getting harder to recognize now. I looked directly at my son's tired eyes and suddenly understood something terrible. Ethan already knew I was hurt. He simply hoped I would continue accepting it quietly because that made his life easier. I smiled softly into the camera. Calm. Controlled. "No," I said gently. "I am not upset anymore." Vanessa relaxed immediately beside him. Ethan smiled with visible relief. Neither of them understood what I truly meant. But they would soon. After that video call, I stopped checking social media entirely. Not because I was afraid of what I might see, but because I finally understood the purpose behind it. Vanessa did not post family photos to preserve memories. She posted them to control the story. Online, she was the perfect wife, the devoted mother, the stylish daughter-in-law holding everyone together with effortless grace. And somewhere over the years, I had quietly accepted the role she assigned me in that story. The aging mother who should feel grateful for occasional invitations and polite phone calls. The woman expected to shrink gracefully into the background while younger people took center stage. But once you see manipulation clearly, it becomes impossible to unsee it again. The next morning, I woke before sunrise and sat on the back porch wrapped in Walter's old flannel robe, watching fog drift across the yard. The air smelled damp and cool after 2 straight days of rain. Somewhere nearby, a lawn sprinkler clicked rhythmically through the silence. For the first time in a long while, I did not feel anxious waiting for my phone to ring. I simply sat there holding a cup of coffee and letting my thoughts settle naturally. Around 8 o'clock, Harold called. "I spent part of last night reviewing additional records," he said carefully. "Loretta, there is something you need to see in person." His tone immediately tightened something inside my chest. By 10 o'clock, I was back in his office sitting across from another stack of papers spread neatly across his desk. Harold adjusted his glasses and slid several printed documents toward me. "These are property consultation records connected to your house and the Wisconsin cabin." I stared down at the pages. My pulse quickened almost immediately. Vanessa's name appeared repeatedly beside terms like future renovation potential, senior relocation timing, and projected resale value. One highlighted section made my stomach turn completely cold. Ideal transition period following emotional adjustment after spouse loss. I looked up slowly. "What does that mean?" Harold's expression remained careful but grim. "It means someone was researching the best time to pressure a widow into leaving her home." For several seconds, I could not speak at all. The room suddenly felt too warm, too small. Walter had not even been gone a full year when Vanessa started planning my removal like some kind of business strategy. Harold continued quietly. "There is more." He handed me another page. This one was an email exchange between Vanessa and a financial consultant. The final line sat there plainly beneath her polished signature. Once Loretta transitions into assisted living, Ethan and I will consolidate the assets and finally move forward with our lake property plans. Our lake property plans. Not mine. Not Walter's legacy. Theirs. I leaned back slowly in my chair, feeling something inside me harden further. Grief had sharp edges. But betrayal was colder than grief. More deliberate. Did Ethan write any of this? I asked quietly. Harold hesitated again before answering. No, but he was copied on several emails. That hurt more than the documents themselves. Silence can become participation when it protects the wrong people. Harold studied me carefully for a moment. Loretta, most people in your situation react emotionally first. Anger. Panic. Confrontation. He folded his hands together calmly. You have not done any of that. I stared down at Walter's wedding ring, still circling my finger. Walter used to say anger makes people careless. Harold gave the smallest nod. Your husband was right. On the drive home, I stopped at a grocery store mostly because I needed normal movement around me. Shopping carts. Cashiers. People arguing over cereal brands. Ordinary life continuing while mine quietly rearranged itself. I wandered slowly through the produce section, staring at strawberries without really seeing them. That was when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Mrs. Hayes. I turned and found myself face to face with Melissa Turner, one of Emma's elementary school teachers. She smiled warmly the moment she recognized me. I have not seen you at pickup lately. Pickup. The word caught me off guard. Oh, I said carefully. Vanessa usually handles that now. Melissa nodded politely, before adding something that made my entire body go still. Emma misses when you came every Thursday. She used to talk about it constantly. I blinked in confusion. Every Thursday? Melissa looked surprised. For art club. Vanessa said your arthritis got too bad for driving, so you could not volunteer anymore. I stared at her silently. Vanessa told the school I was physically unable to help. Another quiet erasure. Another explanation designed to make my absence feel natural and unavoidable. Melissa continued smiling kindly, completely unaware of what she had just revealed. Emma even cried one afternoon because she thought you did not want to come anymore. My throat tightened painfully. Emma was only 8 years old. Children believe whatever adults tell them. How many other stories had Vanessa rewritten behind my back? How many little disappointments had my grandchildren quietly blamed on me because it was easier than questioning their mother? I somehow managed to finish shopping before driving home in complete silence. Every traffic light gave me another memory I could suddenly reinterpret differently. Vanessa canceling my weekly visits because the children were too busy. Ethan saying the kids forgot to call on Mother's Day. Emma growing quieter around me over the past year. None of it happened accidentally. Isolation works best when done slowly enough that the victim keeps blaming themselves. Back home, I carried groceries into the kitchen and stopped abruptly when I noticed something strange on the counter. A bouquet of tropical flowers sat beside a gift bag tied with a gold ribbon. There was a card attached in Vanessa's handwriting. Thinking of you from paradise. Love you. I almost laughed out loud standing there alone in my kitchen. The performance never stopped with her. Even cruelty had to look beautiful from the outside. I opened the gift bag slowly. Inside sat an expensive silk scarf printed with bright Caribbean flowers and a coffee mug that read, "Retired and Relaxing." Beneath it was a brochure for a luxury retirement community in Naples, Florida. My smile disappeared instantly. She was not even hiding it anymore. I lowered myself carefully into a chair and stared at the brochure spread across the table. Smiling silver-haired couples playing tennis. Organized social activities. Shuttle transportation. Independent living with care support available. Every sentence felt less like an invitation and more like a relocation plan already waiting for my approval. Then I noticed writing along the bottom corner in Ethan's handwriting. Thought this place looked nice for you, Mom. I closed my eyes slowly. There it was. Proof in his own handwriting that he knew exactly what was happening. Maybe he convinced himself it was practical. Maybe Vanessa framed everything as concern for my future. But at some point, my son stopped asking what I wanted for my life and started discussing where I should be placed. I sat there for a long time staring at the brochure while afternoon sunlight shifted quietly across the kitchen floor. Eventually, I stood and carried the flowers directly to the trash bin outside. Not dramatically. Not angrily. Just calmly. Like removing something dead from the house. Later that evening, my phone buzzed with another video from the cruise. This time it was Emma showing seashells she collected on the beach. "Grandma, Mommy says next year maybe you can come if the trip is not too exhausting for you." I watched her sweet little face carefully trying to understand why that sentence hurt more than the missing money ever could. Because financial betrayal damages security. But emotional manipulation damages identity. Vanessa was slowly teaching my grandchildren to see me as fragile. Temporary. A burden people politely accommodate until they disappear. I replayed Emma's video twice before setting the phone down gently. Then I walked upstairs to my bedroom, opened Walter's side of the closet, and pulled down the old leather briefcase he carried during most of Ethan's childhood. Inside were folders containing every major family document dating back nearly 30 years. Mortgage records, insurance policies, investment reports, and tucked near the bottom, one small envelope labeled in Walter's handwriting, for Loretta only. My pulse quickened slightly as I opened it. Inside sat a single handwritten note. "If you are reading this, sweetheart, trust your instincts this time. Do not let guilt make your decisions for you anymore." I sat quietly on the edge of the bed holding that note while the evening light faded slowly around me. Then, for the first time since all of this began, I made a decision that did not involve protecting anyone else's feelings. I reached for my phone, opened my banking app, and began changing every password Ethan had ever known. Changing the passwords should have felt dramatic. Final. Instead, it felt strangely ordinary. I sat at the kitchen table wearing reading glasses Walter bought me 2 Christmases before he died, slowly typing new combinations into banking websites while the dishwasher hummed softly behind me. Outside, sunlight spilled across the backyard, warm and golden after nearly a week of rain. Somewhere down the street, children laughed while riding bicycles home from school. Life kept moving like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Every password I updated felt like reclaiming another small piece of myself. The checking account first. Then the retirement fund. Then the emergency investment account Ethan once called, just a backup for the family. I removed his access quietly. No warnings. No emotional speeches. Harold had already arranged additional security alerts through the bank, and by noon, every financial account tied to my name belonged solely to me again for the first time in years. When I finished, I closed the laptop slowly and sat back in silence. My hands trembled slightly, but not from fear. Relief can feel unfamiliar after long periods of emotional exhaustion. Around 1 o'clock, my phone rang. Ethan. I stared at his name on the screen while my pulse slowed instead of quickened. That surprised me most of all. For years, one missed call from my son could ruin my entire day emotionally. Now I simply watched the screen glow until the ringing stopped. Seconds later, another call came through immediately. Then a text. "Mom, call me." Another one followed almost instantly. "Bank says there is an issue with account access." I looked out the kitchen window before answering. My bird feeder swayed gently in the afternoon breeze while 2 sparrows fought over sunflower seeds. Ordinary things suddenly seemed precious to me lately. Honest. Simple. I finally typed back one sentence. I updated my accounts. 3 dots appeared immediately. Disappeared. Returned again. Why would you do that? Not are you alright? Not did something happen? Just why would you do that? I stared at the message quietly before setting the phone face down on the table without responding further. 20 minutes later, another call came through. This time Vanessa's name appeared. I let that ring too. Then came the voicemail notification. Curiosity got the better of me eventually. I pressed play while standing at the sink rinsing coffee cups. Vanessa's voice poured through the speaker smooth and polished as ever. "Loretta, hi. We are just a little confused over here. Ethan says some transfers are being blocked now and we wanted to make sure nothing happened with fraud or identity theft. Call us back when you can. We are worried about you." Worried about me. I almost smiled. Concern becomes very convincing when access to money disappears. That afternoon, I drove to the Wisconsin cabin alone for the first time since Walter passed away. The drive north always calmed me. Small towns, pine trees, gas stations selling homemade fudge beside fishing bait and postcards. Walter and I used to make this trip every fall with thermoses full of coffee and old jazz music playing softly through the truck speakers. Ethan loved the cabin as a child. Every summer, he spent hours jumping off the dock while Walter taught him how to fish for bass before sunrise. Somewhere during those years, I truly believed family memories guaranteed family loyalty forever. I understand now that memories alone cannot compete with entitlement once people begin viewing love as ownership. By the time I reached the cabin, the sun was beginning to lower behind the trees. The lake stretched still and glassy beneath pale orange light. I stood on the dock for several minutes breathing in the scent of cedar and cool water. Peaceful places can become painful after loss because they remember versions of your life that no longer exist. But this place still felt honest to me. Walter built most of it himself with help from Ethan during high school summers. Every wooden beam held fingerprints from people I once trusted completely. Inside, everything remained exactly as Walter left it. Fishing rods lined carefully beside the fireplace. Board games stacked in the corner cabinet. His old green flannel hanging near the back door. Dust floated through the late sunlight while I moved slowly from room to room remembering birthdays, rainy weekends, family breakfasts around the tiny kitchen table. Then I noticed something strange in the guest bedroom. Several drawers stood partially open. Closet hangers shifted awkwardly. At first I thought perhaps I forgot to tidy things after my last visit months earlier. But when I opened the dresser completely, my stomach tightened. Half the blankets were gone. So were several antique quilts Walter's mother handmade decades ago. I walked quickly through the rest of the cabin checking closets and storage areas. More missing items. Vintage lanterns. Wall art. Old fishing equipment. Small things individually, but together enough to leave obvious gaps once I started paying attention. I stood frozen in the middle of the living room while a terrible realization settled over me slowly. Ethan and Vanessa had already started removing things from the cabin without asking me. Like people quietly clearing belongings from a house they already consider theirs. My phone buzzed again in my coat pocket. Another message from Ethan. "Mom, please answer. Vanessa is freaking out." I laughed softly then. Not bitterly. Just quietly. Because somehow that sentence captured the entire imbalance of our relationship. Vanessa panics and Ethan rushes to fix it. I hurt and everyone expects patience. I ignored the text and continued checking the cabin carefully instead. Near the fireplace sat a cardboard box labeled "Donate." Inside were framed family photos. Old recipe books. Walter's favorite wool blanket folded carelessly at the bottom beneath mismatched coffee mugs. I crouched slowly beside the box feeling physically cold despite the warm room. Someone had already begun sorting through our lives. Deciding what still mattered and what could be discarded. My eyes landed on one framed photograph near the bottom. Ethan at age 9 asleep beside Walter on this exact couch after a fishing trip. I picked it up gently and wiped dust from the glass with my sleeve. Suddenly I remembered something else. Last spring, Vanessa insisted on bringing several organizing bins during their cabin visit because she claimed clutter increased anxiety. At the time I thanked her for helping. God. The humiliation of realizing how thoroughly I ignored my own instincts nearly overwhelmed me. Around sunset, I carried the donation box back into the main bedroom and locked it inside Walter's old storage trunk. Then I called Harold from the porch while lake water reflected the fading evening sky. "They have been removing items already," I said quietly once he answered. Silence stretched briefly on the other end before he responded carefully. "I suspected they might. What do I do?" Another pause. Then Harold's calm voice returned. "Loretta, people reveal their true intentions most clearly when they believe ownership is inevitable." I looked across the lake while distant loons called somewhere beyond the trees. "They already think this belongs to them." "Exactly," Harold said softly. "Which means they are going to panic once they realize it never did." After the call ended, I sat alone on the porch wrapped in Walter's old blanket watching darkness settle slowly across the water. My phone buzzed repeatedly inside the cabin. Calls. Messages. Missed FaceTime notifications. I ignored every one of them. For years I trained myself to respond immediately whenever Ethan needed something because that is what mothers do. But sitting there beneath the quiet northern sky, I finally understood something important. Love should never require constant self-erasure. Somewhere around midnight, I walked back inside, locked every door in the cabin carefully, and placed the keys deep inside my purse. Then I turned off the lights and stood for a moment in the darkness listening to the old wooden walls settle around me. This place still carried Walter's presence, his patience, his wisdom, his warning, and, for the first time since losing him, I no longer felt abandoned here. I felt protected. I stayed at the cabin for 3 more days without telling anyone where I was. The silence there felt different from the silence back home. At the house in Chicago, silence used to feel heavy, like waiting for people who no longer intended to arrive. But at the lake, silence felt honest. The kind that lets you hear your own thoughts clearly for the first time in years. Every morning I woke before sunrise, wrapped myself in Walter's old flannel robe, and carried coffee down to the dock while mist drifted across the water. Loons called somewhere in the distance. Pine trees swayed softly in the cool northern wind. And slowly, piece by piece, my mind stopped spinning emotionally and started thinking practically instead. Harold called twice a day with updates. By the second morning, several additional account alerts had triggered after repeated failed login attempts from Ethan's devices. "They're trying hard," Harold said carefully over the phone. I stared across the still water while tightening my grip around the coffee mug. "Do not unlock anything yet," he continued. "Right now, confusion is useful." Confusion. That word stayed with me after the call ended. Because for years, I was the confused one. Confused about canceled visits. Confused about growing distance. Confused about why every family gathering somehow left me feeling lonelier instead of loved. But now the confusion belonged to them. And apparently, they did not tolerate uncertainty nearly as gracefully as they expected me to. Around noon that same day, Ethan finally left a voicemail that sounded genuinely shaken. "Mom, please call me back. The bank froze several transfers connected to our mortgage account and Vanessa is really upset. If this is because of some misunderstanding, we can fix it together. Our mortgage account. Not your account. Not your retirement savings. Ours." I replayed the message twice while standing in Walter's workshop beside the cabin. Dust floated through sunlight streaming across old tools hanging neatly on the walls. Walter believed organization revealed character. Every screwdriver had its place. Every fishing lure labeled carefully in small containers. Looking around that room now, I realized how exhausting it must have been for him watching me ignore signs he saw clearly. My phone buzzed again with another message. This one from Vanessa directly. "Loretta, we do not understand why you are doing this while we are trying to enjoy family time. Ethan is stressed enough already." I laughed softly out loud then. Even now, she framed herself as the victim. My pain was inconvenience. My boundaries were aggression. My independence was somehow unfair to them. I did not respond. Instead, I walked deeper into the workshop and opened one of Walter's old filing cabinets. Inside sat decades of carefully organized receipts, warranty papers, cabin maintenance records, and handwritten notes. Walter documented everything. Near the bottom drawer, I found another folder labeled Property. Curious, I carried it back into the sunlight and sat at the workbench flipping slowly through the pages. Most of it involved routine ownership paperwork for the cabin until one document near the back caught my attention immediately. It was a preliminary renovation proposal from nearly a year earlier, requested by Vanessa Carter. My stomach tightened. The proposal included luxury upgrades, expanded guest suites, outdoor entertainment spaces, dock redesign, estimated resale increase after renovations. Attached beside it sat handwritten notes in Vanessa's neat script. Potential Airbnb market. Could attract high-end summer renters. Need Loretta emotionally ready before transition. Emotionally ready before transition. I stared at those words for a long time while something cold settled inside my chest. They were not just planning my future. They were planning profits. Walter's cabin. Walter's memories. Walter's handmade furniture and family traditions. Reduced into investment potential and seasonal rental income. I suddenly remembered Vanessa walking through the cabin last summer taking measurements with her phone while joking about modernizing the place. Ethan laughed beside her while I washed dishes in the kitchen pretending not to notice how uncomfortable I felt. My instincts knew long before my mind allowed me to accept it. That afternoon, I drove into town to buy groceries and supplies. The little market near the lake still looked exactly the same as it did 20 years ago. Wooden floors creaking softly beneath shelves stocked with fishing bait, canned soup, postcards, and homemade pies near the register. Old Mr. Delaney still worked the counter despite being at least 80 years old now. "Loretta Hayes," he said warmly when I walked in. "Been too long since we saw you up here." I smiled genuinely for the first time in days. "I suppose it has." As he rang up my groceries, he hesitated slightly before speaking again. "Your boy and his wife were here last month." My stomach tightened instantly. "They were." He nodded while placing apples carefully into a paper bag. "Asked a lot of questions about local contractors and seasonal rental permits." He chuckled lightly. "Your daughter-in-law sure seems excited about fixing the cabin up." My chest went completely still. Even strangers already believed the cabin belonged to Ethan and Vanessa eventually. They had been building that narrative publicly for months. Maybe longer. I somehow managed to finish the transaction politely before walking back to my car feeling colder than the autumn air around me. The manipulation reached further than I realized. They were not simply waiting for inheritance someday. They were actively preparing to take over my life while I was still living it. That night, I sat by the fireplace wrapped in a blanket while wind rattled softly against the cabin windows. My phone buzzed repeatedly on the coffee table beside me. Missed calls from Ethan. Messages from Diane asking if everything was all right. One final text from Vanessa arrived just before 10. "The children are confused why Grandma is ignoring us." There it was again. Emotional pressure disguised as concern. Vanessa always used the children strategically whenever she sensed control slipping away. Guilt works best on people conditioned to sacrifice themselves emotionally. But sitting there beside Walter's old stone fireplace, something inside me remained unexpectedly calm. Not numb. Just clear. I finally understood that protecting myself did not make me cruel. It made me awake. Around midnight, another message arrived from Ethan. This one felt different immediately. Shorter. Less polished. "Mom, please. Vanessa says the mortgage payment bounced because the transfer did not go through. I did not realize how much was connected to your accounts." I read that sentence 3 times slowly. Then I closed my eyes. There it was. The truth finally beginning to surface beneath all the excuses. Ethan and Vanessa built their lifestyle partially using my money without ever fully admitting it aloud. The luxury cruise. The expensive home. The renovations. The private school activities. All while treating me like an aging burden they needed to manage carefully until my assets officially became theirs. My heart ached then, not because of the money, but because Ethan clearly normalized it somewhere along the way. He no longer saw support as generosity. He saw it as infrastructure. Expected. Permanent. Available on demand. I stood slowly and walked toward the front window overlooking the dark lake outside. The moon reflected softly across the water while pine trees swayed beneath the night sky. Walter loved this view. He used to stand exactly here after everyone went to bed holding a cup of tea while quietly checking locks before turning in for the night. "A home should make people feel safe," he once told me. I understand now why he worked so hard to protect this place legally before he died. Not because he distrusted Ethan completely, but because he understood how entitlement changes people over time, especially when someone like Vanessa keeps feeding it carefully year after year. My phone buzzed one final time. Another message from Ethan. "Mom, are you seriously going to punish us over one missed dinner?" I stared at those words for several long seconds while something deep inside me finally settled permanently into place. One missed dinner. That was how he understood all of this. Not years of manipulation. Not financial betrayal. Not emotional isolation. Just one overreaction from his aging mother. Slowly, I set the phone down on the windowsill beside me. Then I looked out across the dark water and whispered something aloud for the first time since Walter died. I see it now. The morning after Ethan sent that message, I woke before dawn and sat alone at the kitchen table inside the cabin listening to rain move softly across the roof. The words still echoed in my mind. One missed dinner. It amazed me how easily people reduce years of pain into a single convenient misunderstanding once accountability becomes uncomfortable. I stared into my coffee for a long time thinking about all the moments I minimized my own hurt just to keep peace inside the family. Every canceled holiday. Every quiet humiliation. Every time Vanessa spoke to me with polite impatience while Ethan pretended not to notice. Somewhere along the way, I became so focused on avoiding conflict that I forgot respect was supposed to exist naturally inside love. Around 7 in the morning, my phone rang again. This time I answered. Ethan's relief flooded through the speaker instantly. Mom. Finally. I remained quiet for several seconds. Are you all right? He asked quickly, though his voice sounded strained in a way that made the question feel secondary to whatever panic was happening on his side. I am fine, I said calmly. Silence followed briefly before he exhaled sharply. Okay, good. Listen, there are some problems with the accounts and Vanessa is freaking out because several automatic payments bounced overnight. Automatic payments. Again. Not concern about me disappearing for days. Not concern over my emotional state after being abandoned on my birthday. Just logistics. I leaned back slowly in my chair watching pale gray light spread across the lake outside the window. That sounds stressful, I said quietly. Ethan hesitated. Mom, why are you acting like this? I almost smiled at the question because it revealed everything. Boundaries always feel cruel to people accustomed to unlimited access. Like what? Cold. The words settled between us heavily. Cold. After years of being emotionally neglected, financially manipulated, publicly excluded, and quietly erased from my own family, I was now cold because I stopped immediately solving problems for them. I spoke carefully. Ethan, when was the last time you asked me how I was doing after your father died? Silence. Long enough to answer for him. I continued softly. Not whether I paid bills. Not whether I needed paperwork signed. Not whether I wanted to babysit. I mean truly asked how I was surviving. His breathing shifted slightly on the line. Mom, that is not fair. No, I replied calmly. I suppose it is not. Another long silence followed. Then his voice lowered. Vanessa said you are upset because of the cruise. There it was again. The simplification. The desperate need to reduce betrayal into overreaction. I looked down at Walter's wedding ring, still resting against my coffee mug, where I absent-mindedly removed it while washing dishes the night before. Your wife told your daughter that I would ruin your vacation. Ethan inhaled sharply. Emma misunderstood. Did she? He said nothing. I continued quietly. Your teacher told Emma I stopped volunteering because my health was failing. Your wife told people I chose to spend my birthday alone. You both discussed moving me into assisted living before I ever mentioned leaving my home. My voice never rose once. That seemed to unsettle him more than anger would have. Mom, he started weakly. Please do not make this into something bigger than it is. Bigger than it is. I closed my eyes briefly. You already made it bigger than it needed to be when you stopped seeing me as a person. He sounded genuinely frustrated now. That is not true. Then why does your mortgage depend on my accounts, Ethan? Complete silence. Not confusion. Not shock. Silence. Because he knew. Maybe not every detail. Maybe not every manipulation Vanessa orchestrated quietly behind the scenes. But he knew enough. Things got complicated financially after the interest rates went up, he finally admitted. Vanessa said temporary transfers would not hurt anything. Temporary. Another soft word covering something ugly underneath. You used my retirement money to support your lifestyle while discussing where to place me once my husband died. It was not like that. Then explain it to me. He could not. Instead, he shifted emotionally the way people do when truth corners them unexpectedly. Vanessa has been under a lot of stress. I actually laughed softly then. Not mockingly. Just tired. Do you hear yourself? Another silence. Then his voice dropped lower. Mom, are you trying to punish us? There it was again. Not accountability. Punishment. As though my independence existed only in relation to their comfort. I looked out across the dark lake while rain continued tapping gently against the windows. No, Ethan, I said quietly. I think I am finally protecting myself. He did not know how to answer that. We ended the call shortly afterward without resolution. No yelling. No dramatic confrontation. Just distance settling naturally between two people finally speaking honestly after years of avoidance. The rest of the day passed quietly. I cleaned the cabin thoroughly from top to bottom mostly because physical work helped organize my thoughts. I washed curtains. Reorganized kitchen cabinets. Polished Walter's old fishing tackle boxes while classic jazz played softly through the tiny radio near the sink. Ordinary tasks grounded me in ways emotional conversations never could. Around noon, Harold called with another update. You should know something before they return from the cruise tomorrow, he said carefully. I paused while folding towels beside the fireplace. What? Vanessa attempted to contact one of the Wisconsin property offices this morning asking about ownership transfer procedures. I stopped moving entirely. Transfer procedures? She apparently believed the cabin was already scheduled for future inheritance restructuring. A strange calm moved through me then. Not shock anymore. Confirmation. Every instinct I ignored for years now stood plainly in front of me. Harold continued carefully. Loretta, people do not become this entitled overnight. This level of expectation develops gradually over time. I sat slowly on the couch beside the folded towels. Walter knew. Yes, Harold said softly. I believe he did. After we hung up, I walked toward the hallway closet and opened the cedar chest where Walter stored old photo albums and family keepsakes. Beneath stacks of Christmas decorations and fishing maps sat a small wooden box I had not opened in years. Inside were handwritten birthday cards Walter gave me throughout our marriage. Little notes tucked into random places just to make me smile. One card from our 20th anniversary caught my attention immediately. I opened it slowly. Loretta, thank you for loving people even when they do not always deserve the depth of it. But promise me something. Never confuse love with surrendering yourself completely. Tears blurred my vision suddenly. Not dramatic sobbing. Just quiet grief moving through me like slow water. Walter spent years trying to remind me that kindness should never require self-destruction. I simply refused to hear it because mothers are taught sacrifice so early we stop recognizing when it becomes exploitation. That evening, I drove into town for dinner at a small diner near the marina Walter loved. The waitress still recognized me immediately and sat me beside the window overlooking the water. Just you tonight, she asked kindly while pouring coffee. Yes, I said. But for the first time in a very long while, the word did not feel lonely. I ordered grilled trout and mashed potatoes while soft country music played overhead. Around me, couples laughed quietly over pie and coffee. Families shared baskets of fries while children colored paper placemats with crayons. Normal life. Honest life. Nobody performing happiness for social media. Nobody manipulating reality to protect appearances. Halfway through dinner, my phone buzzed with a new message from Vanessa. The children are asking why Grandma disappeared. I stared at the screen for several long seconds before finally typing my first direct response to her in days. Grandmothers disappear when families stop treating them like human beings. I sent it before I could reconsider. Her typing bubble appeared immediately, then disappeared, then returned again. Finally, only 3 words arrived. That is dramatic. I set the phone face down beside my plate and looked out at the dark water beyond the diner windows. Dramatic. Women become dramatic the moment they stop quietly enduring disrespect. I smiled faintly to myself, then picked up my fork and finished dinner in complete peace.